Well, I'm Shannon Mullane. I'm the Colorado River reporter with the Colorado Sun. Thanks everyone again for coming. We're gonna obviously dive really into some interesting water discussions today. We're gonna talk about water and growth. I'll lay out some basics to get us started. We'll introduce our lovely panelists, and we're going to try to save about 15 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So save your questions. I hope to get some good ones from you all. I already have a few on the app, so that's great. So let's go ahead and dive in. Basically, we know this, right? We know that Colorado's population is growing. By 2050, we could be up to 7.5 million, 9 million, depends on the estimate. We also know that the state's water supply is limited. And of course, we know that there's a housing affordability crisis, and all of these things connect. So, as one source recently put it, I thought this was really succinct. If you run out of water, you can't build more housing, but if you have to build more housing for affordability, potentially you can only do that with water. So we're just going around and around. I'm hoping that by the end of this, everyone has a good general understanding. We can't answer all questions. I'm not gonna ask you all to solve all of the policy issues on this today, but we'll do our best to get a good conversation going. So let's meet our panelists. We have Ron Redd, the district manager at Parker Water and Sanitation District. He's been there for 10 years. Prior to joining the district, he worked for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the town of Castle Rock, each for more than a decade. Thanks, Ron. And then we have Dylan Roberts, a Colorado State Senator for District 8 that covers 10 counties, northwestern Colorado. It also covers lots of agricultural communities, small towns, rural resort towns, and the headwaters of the Colorado River itself, which I'm sure you all have heard of. I feel like that's one we might have heard of. So he's also on several committees in the legislature that tie directly to what we're talking about today. So that should be an interesting thing to hear about as we go forward. And then we have Jennifer Gimbel, a senior water policy scholar at CSU's Colorado Water Center. She has 35 years of experience in water issues, including working for the Department of the Interior, serving as director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and working in the Attorney General offices in Wyoming and Colorado. And we have, last but not least, Ted Leighty is the CEO for the Colorado Association of Home Builders and of the Home Builders Association of Metro Denver. He has held numerous leadership positions with other organizations, and he also graduated from CU with degrees in political science and public administration. So thanks everyone for coming out. We're gonna start by kind of getting the big picture down on Colorado's water future. And I'm gonna let Jennifer handle it. So, Jennifer, Coloradans around the state are impacted by water supply issues. I'm thinking of water insecurity in the Colorado River Basin, Arkansas, Rio Grande, Republican. Tell me more about the water supply issues in Colorado and what we are headed for.
You missed the South Platte.
Oh no, it's all over. Not to exclude any of them.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure how.
No, it needs to be closer.
Closer?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Shannon, and thanks for inviting me to this conversation today. I've known some of these people on the panel from afar, and I've respected them and the work that they do, and I'm just honored to be here. So what are the challenges? You know, water, the competition for water is increasing. We talked about, Shannon already talked about increased growth. But we also have climate change that's challenging us, or as the scientists like to say, it's not climate change so much now, it's not a drought, it's aridification. Meaning the drought is not gonna go back, we're not gonna go back to flush years. We'll have one or two flush years, we'll have a few of those like we did this last year. It's hotter, it's drier, the soil is drier and consequently uses up more water as it flows over the soil. The plants need more water because of the heat and the aridification in the atmosphere, we're seeing more extreme events. I mean, just look at what Colorado's faced in the last couple of years. Fires, flooding, hail. Look at the hail at Lamar, 6-inch hail. And so it's there. We are sitting and seeing what aridification and climate change is doing. How does that challenge our water supply? The largest reservoir of water in Colorado is not Granby, is not Blue Mesa. It is the snowpack in the Rocky Mountains. And as it gets hotter, and maybe not as much snow, that snowpack gets less, which means then we have less runoff in the streams. Or we have a great snowpack, but the soil is so dry that we may have like 100% normal snowpack, but 53% runoff. That's what happened in the Colorado River about 3 years ago. And so we have these conditions that we now have to adapt to. We have some other issues that come up, and that is with respect to obligations to our downstream neighbors. We are in agreements with our neighbors called compacts, interstate water compacts. They're agreements, but they're more than agreements because they're agreements that are approved by the governors, by the state legislators, and then by Congress. So a compact is an agreement, it's state law, and it's federal law. So it's not, and it's not easy to change, let me tell you. Another issue we have is the silo effect of water development that's happened in Colorado, especially in the Front Range. Part of that is due to how the water law system worked early on. Part of it is due to you have different municipalities setting themselves up. They want to protect themselves, and they want to get the water they need to get. And so that's another challenge we have. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm sure we can talk more about these challenges and have the whole panel just be about those. But thank you for that overview. I want to just go ahead and dive straight into some commonly asked questions that we get when we're talking about growth and water. One has to do with one of these challenges, and this, we can start again with Jennifer if we want, or anybody can dive in. But in Colorado, we move water around, and that's one of the ways that we deliver it, right? The Front Range takes over 500,000 acre-feet annually from trans-mountain diversions when it moves from one basin to another, including diversions from the Colorado River Basin. So, and we know, again, the Colorado River is shrinking and overused. So I'm just curious if we can explain a little bit more specifically about the Colorado River. What does that mean for the water supply in the Front Range and the Western Slope? Who wants to take it?
Take that? Sure.
Cool, thanks, Dylan.
Thank you, and really important question because as a legislator, a senator who represents mostly Western Slope counties, when I come down here to Denver to the Capitol, it's always a challenge sometimes for my colleagues and I from the Western Slope to explain to our Front Range colleagues why they should care about the Colorado River and what's happening on that side of the divide. And it's because of what Shannon exactly just said, is that a large portion of the water that's used here in the Front Range, in the metro area across Colorado, comes from the Western Slope. Lake Dillon, Grand Lake, those diversions through Northern Water and Denver Water are so important to the success and vitality of the Front Range, and that's why everybody in Colorado should care about what's going on the Colorado River, because any reductions that have to happen on the Colorado River because of drought or because of compact negotiations being reopened or anything else are going to affect every citizen of Colorado. So whether it's a farmer on the Eastern Plains in Sterling or a outdoor recreation business in Grand Junction, we are all connected through the Colorado River, and that's why it's very important to know that, and the policy decisions that get made will affect the whole state.
And I would just add, since Dylan didn't mention this, he has set up a program of, set up a task force looking at the Colorado River and how it affects Colorado. I agree with everything he said. We have to look at it. It's important to the state of Colorado. And so he has put that together, and you have people from all over the state that are coming together and trying to figure out, are there things we can do? That being said, the issues on the Colorado River are due to lower basin overuse. And that's a huge problem for us here in the upper basin. We have met our compact obligations and will continue to do that because of Lake Powell. And that's why you heard a lot of noise about, gee, Lake Powell is getting lower and lower and lower. That's our bank account. That's to assure that the upper basin does deliver its compact obligations.
Sure, and again, I'm thankful to be here too. I usually qualify when people introduce me and talk about my California experience. In order to reduce the vandalism on my car, I always tell everyone I was born and raised in Montana, so I get that out there. So a practical impact of the Colorado River issues. Parker Water does not have any flow coming from the west slope. We do have agreements with Aurora and Denver, and there might be some molecules of that water coming over, but we are more south base and Denver basin groundwater. But here's a practical impact of what's happened over the last few years. And if I'm talking to a group of students, they get this, any Lord of the Rings fan, you know, that eye of Sauron, I think. And so what happens is Denver's that eye, and all of a sudden they're not looking at the west slope. They turn around and start looking at the South Platte and even Denver basin groundwater, and they start becoming competition for the water that they've never really paid attention to. So that's a practical impact that we've seen.
Anything else on this we can scoot on? Okay. And I have a sneaking suspicion that folks here know what the lower basin is. Colorado River Basin divided into, that's Nevada, California, and Arizona. So just so we're all clear on that. It gets complicated, as you might have guessed. So another question, and I've kind of gotten this from readers before too, but well, yeah, actually before we go there, let's stick on these water supply challenges. And I mean, every single one of you interacts with the water supply in different ways. That's why we put this particular panel together. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit. You know, Dylan representing northwestern counties, Ron, you're on the ground managing water, Ted, you're working with developers. Could you elaborate a little bit on specific challenges that your communities are facing with water supply? And I was gonna put Dylan first, if you wanna take it first, and then we'll just go down the line.
Thanks. So as Shannon mentioned earlier, this is sort of these are the two biggest issues that I focus on at the legislature: water and housing, because those are the two most important issues facing my district. And my district's not unlike the rest of the state. These are challenges in all parts of Colorado, but we have particularly an acute crisis when it comes to affordable housing in the mountain regions. You think about ski towns like Steamboat, Vail, Breckenridge, and across the western slope, where we cannot support the workforce to keep those communities going right now because the cost of rent and the cost of home ownership is skyrocketing. Just for a price point, the average single-family home in Summit County right now is $2.2 million. That's the average. So there are certainly more that are much higher than that. And that's, a teacher, a nurse, a police officer, somebody who works in recreation, tourism workforce cannot afford that. And so we're seeing a lot of local government efforts, nonprofit efforts, private development efforts to build more housing for that population. And we've had some great success, and the legislature's been able to help with a large chunk of money last year, over $500 million, which is helping kickstart a lot of these projects. But we need to build a whole lot more. The problem is if you're talking about building a whole lot more, and Ted knows all about this, you need to have water for those homes. And especially on the western slope in a lot of these communities that are impacted very much by the ongoing drought and the limited water supply, and now the cost of water infrastructure that makes building affordable housing unaffordable. The tap fees that it takes to install water infrastructure into a home are cost prohibitive for a lot of projects. And so there's this real tension between knowing that we need to build more housing, we need more supply, but that getting that supply is going to be so expensive from a literal dollars and cents perspective, but also a policy perspective of where does the water come from. So that's kind of the big tension we have. We need to solve both of them, but sometimes they're in direct conflict.
Great, yeah. And Ron, like your area is expected to grow in population. Can you tell us where Parker gets its water from and those future water supply challenges, and elaborate there?
Certainly. So Parker Water actually serves 3 cities: Parker, Lone Tree, Castle Pines. Anything east of I-25 we serve. And our water supplies right now, we're about 60% non-renewable Denver Basin groundwater. And the other 40% we get from our return flows. We have a great reclaim program. We capture over 70% of our wastewater return flows and can use those to extinction. And to give you an idea how important that is to us, at build-out, we need about 20,000 acre-feet a year to serve our 3 communities. 8,000 of that will come from the reuse of our wastewater return flows, so that's important. We also have alluvial wells that is considered renewable. We have the Free River, or our junior water rights on Cherry Creek, that we're fortunate enough to have a storage basin that we can stuff it in there when it's available. So about right now, though, 60% is Denver Basin non-renewable groundwater. And so the challenge, of course, is to get that, our first phase is to get to 75% renewable and use our groundwater basin more for drought in the future. And so the good news is, and I sleep better once I went from Castle Rock to Parker, is we actually have the water. But it's located about 140 miles away. And so in order to capture that water, and it's junior rights, it's a Free River or junior rights, and so we're not buying and drying, but it's more that type of water. We have to build a reservoir down there. And so Reuter Hess Reservoir, if you've seen it, 75,000 acre foot reservoir. We're going to be building a 70,000 acre foot reservoir down by Akron. And that allows us to stuff water in there. And so then we can flip it and get more of the renewable coming in. And I'll just throw this number out because it was interesting. We had a wet year. I don't know if anyone noticed. All my finance people, I got to put on suicide watch because we're not selling any water. But it's a good thing, and we'll be fine. This year, if our project would have been built, the limiting factors are pumps to pull the Free River off. We would have stored 35,000 acre feet in our Akron reservoir. But what I like to point out is, let's look at the last 3 years. So this was a wet year. Everyone expected that. So if you look at a 2-year period, 2 years ago, we would have stored 0 acre feet. It's a very dry year. But what people, it shocks because it was a few years ago. If you go 3 years ago, it was a dry year as well, but we had a decent snowmelt. The runoff, we had a fairly high flow, and we would have been able to pull Free River out of the South Platte for 7 weeks, and we would have stored another 20,000 acre feet. So in a 3-year period, we would have put 55,000 acre feet away. And to put that in context, we've been putting water into Reuter Hess for 11 years now, and we have 24,000 acre feet in there. So it's just shows you that if you have the storage, you can capture it. But probably the biggest challenge we face as a water district is we have high growth. We're supposed to be like in a slow growth period. Interest rates are high. We kicked over 550 new homes last month. The year before, we were at 1,700 new homes. So we have this high growth going on, And so we're trying to meet the demands of those folks. And then the other biggest challenge is funding these long-term programs. And we have a program. It's anticipated to be online in 2040, but we need that much time to develop the funding and to pay for it. And you're mentioning tap fees. We're getting ready for our budget. Our rate analysis came back, and our tap fees are probably going to click over $50,000 per house. And what that looks at is not only long-term water that we're looking at, but just meeting the needs of sewer lines, water lines, tanks, pump stations. So we are a big part of the affordability issue, but it costs what it costs. So, but it's a tremendous chunk. So figuring out a way to pay for that. And it's easy for us in the water business to spend others people's money, but our goal is to find a way to be efficient and to make it easier on our customers' pocketbooks.
Yeah, so some of the challenges is it faces housing development, and Ron's touched on it, right? He just talked about their tap fees having to go to $50,000 to pay for the infrastructure that he was talking about to have renewable sources. Dylan talked about the cost of housing, or how the cost of water contributes to the cost of housing in his district, and it's everywhere across the state. There's two ways that we can get water to new housing developments, right? You either pick somewhere like Parker or Denver that has municipal water supply, and you pay a tap fee or water connection fee to provide housing or to provide water to that new housing, or you have to come with your own water. So developers have to go out there and either do it cash in lieu, or they have to secure their own rights and basically dedicate them over to the municipality or whatever local government or water provider that will be the utility for those new homes. And the cost has gone up by tens of thousands, right? We'll talk a little bit about transbasin diversions, right? So the Colorado Big Thompson, right? Those shares, CBT shares, as we call them, have gone up from 7,000 to 70,000 since 2009. And in Aurora, they just doubled their water system fees to $54,000. And in Castle Rock, they're about $47,000 right now. So, I don't want to go too far afield away from water, but as these water pressures happen and contribute to the further cost of housing, we need to be really careful as policymakers and bodies and stakeholders that we're making sure that we can reduce some of those other costs as much as possible in the production of housing. So whether it's land use and how land use is done, how it's the approval processes, what sort of materials or design guidelines are required. But those are the major challenges, right, is really in cost. The water is, we've got a lot of water in the state, but it's not where the people are, right? So now we've done a lot of the transbasin diversions. I agree with Jennifer. We comply with our compacts. I think sometimes, and I'd love your take on this, Jennifer, and anyone else, I think we send a lot more water downriver than we actually are supposed to. And that's where I think things like what Parker has done with more water storage are necessary in Colorado, hopefully more offstream than instream. But we need more water storage so that we can develop more surface water or more renewable water, and we can take less pressure off our groundwater. We also need to be more innovative in how we utilize this first-in-time, first-in-right, or prior appropriation, and how we do rainwater harvesting, right? One of our developers, if you haven't looked up Sterling Ranch or seen how Sterling Ranch has developed and how it will continue to exist, it's really spectacular, right? But they had to go to the legislature in 2009 and get authorization to do a pilot program that says we are going to capture rainwater, we're going to use it for non-potable purposes, we're going to have excess water, and we're going to recharge the streams and not injure anyone's senior water rights. They're still within that pilot phase, but there was a lot of pushback on that, obviously, right? And I understand that water rights is a property right. People have paid good money to have access and develop, and deliver that water to certain places. But we need to be willing to have more solutions like that. They also work with companies like Siemens so that they require every builder in that development to have this Siemens I'm going to call it contraption because I don't know what it's really called. And it monitors their outdoor use and their indoor use. It goes to their phone on an app, and they can monitor what, whether there's a leakage in the system or whether they're overwatering. They also use a ratio system that says, it's a water sense system, so they won't irrigate on days where there's rain, or even the day after where there's rain. They're using more than 50% less of water in those homes that have been developed than any other place in the metro area right now. So we need solutions like that to help us in our challenges. We've got the water, we can use it more smartly. We can need, like companies like Hydroloop and Greater that have these systems that reuse gray water, so after you shower or after you wash dishes, that can stay in your closed loop system and that can be used for non-potable purposes. There's ways that we can use water more efficiently that we need to explore, and we haven't, because I think we've too much just said, well, we're a prior appropriation state, there's not much we can do.
All right, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So we'll elaborate as we go a little bit further on that too. All righty, so everything with water, people are very passionate. I don't know if I've heard of a water idea where there's not some element of pushback somewhere in there. So we're gonna dive into some of that. Okay, so we've established population growth, water supply gap. The Colorado water report from this year, the state water report said that the municipal and industrial supply gap by 2050 could be somewhere like from 230,000 acre feet to 740,000 acre feet, depending on the situation and how climate goes and state response. So it's an interesting thing that we're looking at. This is the reader question I was gonna mention earlier. Readers have asked about instituting growth caps to more firmly link water availability and growth. Should the water supply limit how Colorado grows? This question is for everyone, but I also want, if we can be specific about what a growth cap or a growth limit means to you when you're responding, that could be helpful. Does anybody want to go first? I can call on someone if you're not. Dylan, I kind of want you to go first. Can you do it? All right.
So the one way I would answer that is I think water already does limit growth. I mean, Ted mentioned it earlier that when a developer wants to build new housing, they either need to do it in an area where there is water or they bring water rights with them. So I think that's in practice limiting growth. We also, municipal water providers across the state, when a new development wants to go forward, they have to go to their planning commission and their town council and their county commission. And in order to get approved, they need a ability to serve letter from their municipal water provider. And if they don't have the ability to serve, they're not going to get water for that development. It's unlikely to get approved. And so, no developer, no even individual homeowner is going to build a home that doesn't have water. You can't live there. I think in terms, when we're talking about incentivizing growth though, and doing that, I think there could be a way to formalize that process and ensure that we're not overdeveloping where we don't have water, but we need to focus on the right type of growth, I think. Things like density and infill is by nature more water efficient. So more density, especially in the metro areas, less sprawl out into our agriculture communities that dries up ag land and takes more infrastructure to get the water to, is worse for our water future. But more density is more water efficient, and so you can house more people and use less water if you focus on density and infill. And that's not just infill here in the middle of Denver, but it can happen in the middle of a ski town as well. If you're focusing on building in the right places, you're going to become more water efficient.
I'll just add, because I'll be quick, because my first note on that question was the same thing that came out of the senator's mouth. It already does, right? It already limits where you can grow and how you grow. And I would also agree with the senator's comments. We need to look at building more density, using less land, fewer resources. It helps on water delivery systems as well. So yeah, just a brief answer there that I agree with everything the senator just said.
So, and I could give a real life example. So we had a small developer come to us, small piece of property, wanted 120 single family equivalents, and he had enough water for 22. And so at Parker, you can actually buy your way out of that, but the intent of buying your way out is if you're 1 or 2 acre feet short, not 100 acre feet short. And so he said no, and they were mad, but six months later, they come back, high density, 25 SFEs for that property. So it fit the property well. One of the interesting components of this that comes up a lot is people say we got to stop the growth, and so I don't have an answer, but I see both sides. It's a double-edged sword. So in our situation, we have a lot of non-renewable groundwater that has been built on for a long time, and if we were to stop growth or limit growth, you still have a non-renewable water. The good news is you're going to stretch that aquifer use out for a long period of time. But eventually, you run out of water, and you have less people to solve the problem. So that's one side of the sword. The other one is growth accelerates the use of that non-renewable water, but they bring a ton of money to the table to solve the problem. So you have more money, more people paying for the solution. I don't know the answer, but those are the two sides that we work with on that.
Alrighty. We'll come back to some of these things. So another question that I've gotten from folks before, housing prices. Let's talk about housing. Housing prices in Colorado are rising more quickly than Colorado household incomes, right? People are struggling to afford to buy or rent homes, and this is something that I've seen in my community. We've all probably seen in our communities in different ways. So one way to address this affordable housing crisis that I've heard from folks is to build more houses. And do we have enough water for that? Is that a realistic, does that work? Is that gonna work? Maybe we can go, Ted, if you want to start, and we'll go down the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to some of our answers from the last question. Currently, yes, we do, or we wouldn't be building more housing to the points that Ron and the senator made. But we do need to embrace, as I talked about earlier, some of these innovative conservation approaches that I've walked you through that Sterling Ranch is doing. Rotational fallowing, Parker Water was an early pioneer on that in Denver, or in the Colorado region. If you talk to water experts, in those lower basin states, they'll talk about the rotational fallowing has the ability to really quench our thirst, if you will, even in these drought years. And it's not necessarily, it's not drying up Western agriculture, but it's saying, okay, farmers will pay you, X amount of money if you'll cultivate, X fewer acres, and then that water can be delivered for other uses, primarily probably municipal uses, as it's done in California for San Diego and LA. So I think we need to do that. Colorado Springs Utilities has done a really good job. They've reduced their overall water usage by 40% as their population has grown by 45%. So there are ways to do more with less, if you will, that we need to really be looking at. But to your question, Shannon, yeah, I mean, we have enough water to continue. Do we have enough water to get to market equilibrium and bring down the cost of housing? I don't have that crystal ball in front of me. I hope so. We need to, for the sake of people to be housed, so.
What he said.
Jennifer?
Yeah,
I totally agree with that, yeah.
let the record know.
Yes. So I agree too. I mean, I think it's no secret to everybody in this room, Colorado is a popular place. It's a beautiful place. I don't blame people for wanting to live here. I feel very lucky that I get to live here. I think we all do. So unless that changes anytime soon, we're gonna need to build more housing. I don't think we should use water as an excuse not to build more housing, because we can be innovative. We can address this from a policy perspective, from a private sector perspective, to find ways to build more housing that accommodates our water future. But we shouldn't be ignorant to the fact that we are gonna have less water going forward. This mega drought or aridification, as Jennifer mentioned, which I agree with, is going to last for a very long time. And so we're gonna require innovation by our water utilities, by our builders to put in to build more water efficient homes and buildings, but also shared sacrifice from the entire state. And we're gonna have to incentivize more efficiency in the agriculture space. If they can save more water, there's gonna be more water available. And if we're talking about the Colorado River, we have to look and put more responsibility and burden, to be frank, on California and Arizona. They're the ones that are overusing their share of the Colorado River. And I don't think we should institute any drastic anti-growth policies in Colorado until something changes down in California and Arizona. So, that's what I would add to that question.
So can I, Dylan brought up an issue that I've really pay attention to, and that is with respect to agriculture, and Ted mentioned it too, is that is there are partnerships with agriculture where we can still preserve agriculture, preserve our food supply, and yet cut deals with municipalities with respect to that. And there have been some very innovative ways to do that. Aurora's done it, Denver's done it, Parker has done it. I mentioned Parker twice in a paper I did with respect to how to do this and how to work with farmers in the project they're doing with the lower South Platte Conservancy District. And so that's true, but that farmer owns that water right in that land. And so then you have this, you can't tell him what to do with his water. And so it's just another piece of the puzzle that has to go in to all of this.
I'm not sure I can compete with that little mouse. So if I jump on the table and scream, it's because I don't like mice. But, so, I think we have water, and it's more the simplistic approach, but half our water we produce goes on the ground. Parker Water produced 3 billion gallons of water for our community last year. 1.5 billion went on the ground for landscaping. So I immediately think if we ever get in a crisis, we know we have the supply to meet life-sustaining water for indoor use. So, but that's unpractical. You know, the people, we're humans, we need open space and we need places to go. But we've already got that capacity built in, and so Colorado Springs has absolutely got a great program, and they're doing a good job, and we're not shy about stealing it from them, and we want to use a lot of their ideas. But there's an education component we got to work on. We have this beautiful community of the canyons, and if you ever go out there, it's like houses dropped into this Colorado landscape. It's beautiful. It's all native landscaping, and I go there a lot. There's a coffee shop there, and they overwater the native landscaping to where it's flowing off the sidewalks and into the streets, and it's just like it doesn't even need to be watered. But there's this education component that people can't handle. So regulations, unfortunately, are probably a good hammer, but but I do believe conservation won't solve the problem, but we certainly can do a lot better, and I think we have plenty of water for the future.
Okay. Yeah, I think, all right. Well, I heard a little bit about agricultural water and wanted to touch on that. I know when I've talked with farmers in my reporting, I know people do rotational systems on their land. They fallow for a season. I get it. But fallowing is also a concerning term for ag. And it means, and I'll try and repeat my sources. I'm sorry that I'm not them, so excuse me if I get it wrong. But it means, you know, more startup time, maybe more startup costs to put a field back into production, and it might mean loss of labor hours, maybe even economic impacts if we're not farming in areas. So, and I know Colorado's urban areas have gone to agricultural land for water supply. It's a big source of contention, and it is a source of concern for agricultural communities. So the simple question that I put forward to you guys is, should cities take ag water to support their growth? It's so complicated, but I want to take a second to kind of dwell on that before we scoot along. And Dylan, Jennifer, you can.
Let me go on that.
Yeah.
We have a lot of newer towns developing in northern Colorado. Just drive down I-25 and you see the signs for them. And these are developing towns that are starting to bloom and to, you know, grow fast. And they don't necessarily have the water they need. And the easiest way to get it is to go to a farmer and buy him out, or to have some kind of deal. You know, people say, do we have enough water to support growth in Colorado? Yes, if we don't want to deal with agriculture. that's not on the table. And so we have to think more positively about how to deal with agriculture. I talk to farmers and they say, they're so tired of hearing people say, well, why don't you grow something other than sorghum? Because that just sucks up the water. Well, they have the seed supply for that, they have the machinery for that, they have the market for that. That market supports the rural communities. It is just not that simple. We need to take and we need to put in more money in research that would help those farmers make those kind of changes, rather than just saying, why don't you?
I certainly agree with Jennifer, and what I would add there is when we're talking about the agriculture space and their water use, I'm much more in favor of incentives rather than mandates. You know, the permanency of buying farmers' water rights and transferring it to municipal use is devastating to the agriculture industry. Obviously, you take that land out of production forever.
And the environment.
And the environment, yes,
Yep.
exactly. We need to focus more on some successful tools that are in place that allow farmers and ranchers to temporarily, they're back.
Competing with
yeah.
the mouse
Dallas is
again.
back. Oh,
Yeah.
there he is.
We have an extra panelist.
Yes. He's looking for water.
He's representing the environment. All right.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know where I was. Yeah. Yeah, so we have some great programs in place in Colorado that allow water rights holders, agriculture water rights holders, to temporarily loan some of their water to the in-stream flow loan program when there's a dry summer and we need to keep our rivers running for the environment and for outdoor rec. There's the opportunity for them to get paid to do that. If we go into any sort of demand management program, which would happen if there continue to be severe drought or imposed cuts along any river system, that should, I think, be as temporary and as voluntary as possible, so that the farmers that want to do it for a certain time period can do it and then go back to farming in the future, and that they get fairly compensated for that loss. So that's the other thing we need to keep in mind when we're talking about cuts to agriculture, is how do we keep it as temporary as possible, and how do we make sure those water rights holders are compensated for their losses, because we don't want them to leave the industry entirely. We already have an extremely old agriculture industry. The average age of a farmer is over 50 in Colorado right now. That is not sustainable for that industry or for the food that all of us rely on. And so that's where I would go to. If we're talking about more efficiency in agriculture, yes, we need to have that, but let's do it on a more incentive-based approach rather than mandate approach.
So everything said, I absolutely agree with, and we're in the mix of this every day, and so I think we can do better, and I love the project that we've come up with, and again, it's a no bind dry water, it's a free river, it's junior water rights, but we have a component in there for alternate transfer methods, ATMs that we call them, and it allows farmers to fallow a chunk of land and lease us the water they don't use, but it's a limited, it's 3 out of 10 years, and what it does is it provides them, I like to call it a water crop, so they can take a part of their farm out, continue to farm, and they're guaranteed a revenue, whether it rains, hails, or no water. And so we love that approach, and it's voluntary, and it gives them a way to leverage their water rights they have. We've hit some opposition out in our project, and a lot of it is because some farmers want to sell their water rights. They want to farm until they retire. They know they're sitting on a gold mine, and they want all that. And so, and I get that. And so, but we are approaching that as when you dry up a community, it changes the culture, and it destroys the culture, and we don't want to be part of that. So we feel like we've come up with a way to do that. I would love to take credit for that. But and I admit this in all of my presentations, 2013, my mindset was we have farms out there, let's go dry them up and move the water back. But what we did different was we sat down with the farmers out there, the Lower South Platte Conservancy District and all those other water districts, and talked to them and listened. And they had great ideas that could take care of our need and benefit them, and we just listened. I know my ex-wife wish I would have figured that out a whole lot sooner, but it really has made for a great partnership.
Yeah, and Ron, I'll stick with you for one moment here too, because this project that you're talking about has a different relationship with the agricultural community than another project that gets discussed with Douglas County, which is the renewable water resources proposal to export water out of San Luis Valley. If you have read our coverage, you might have run across stories about this. It would go over like 2 mountain it would be a big proposal. But San Luis Valley, they have a very significant agricultural community, and they're very tight on water, and that type of export has just been very unpopular with the counties over there. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on that proposal, the differences, and what the status there for that is?
Sure, you're going to get me in trouble. So San Luis Valley has what they figure about 20,000 acre feet water over there, and they're trying to sell it to the Douglas County area. This project, I moved to Colorado in 2000, and I think it's been on the books since 1995. And so they haven't sold it to a water-starved Front Range. It's probably a good tell why. And so they've been there forever, but you'll be reading a lot more about it. We've always said thanks, no thanks. We have our water. Our policy is no buy and dry. The board really wants to go down this path. But the county, Douglas County's been involved. There's a lot of politics with this one. It got personal real quick for Parker Water because even according to their spokesman, they are trying to get a majority board members on Parker Water Board. And so when they're interviewed, I think it was the Colorado Politics paper, the spokesman said, well, yes, we are investing heavily into Parker Water elections. They had two principals that don't live in our district spend $32,000 on 2 candidates. One got on. And the spokesman said something along the lines of, we want open-minded people on the board because we have a difficult project and it's hard to get people to pay attention to us. That tells me they want to shift our focus to that water. So that's concerning. I will say, and I gotta say this publicly, the 2 board members that are somewhat connected to RWR are great board members. I think people that give money to people for campaigns think their intentions probably aren't good, but the people in the communities have a heart for our community. So my 2 board members are great, and they're supportive and where we're going. But the intent was probably not pure. And again, that has us worried because the board of directors can shift us from Platte Valley to San Luis. So that became personal. The biggest thing that I tell our customers is we already have our water and we're moving forward. We're actually doing geotechnical work on a dam. We're purchasing property and right away. This is a real project and we're moving forward. Our costs we're partnering with Castle Rock, probably $680 million. It's a lot of money. Parker is about 480 of that, 460 million. And that's a lot of money. The San Luis Valley's project, I don't know much about the project. I haven't actually seen like how they get it here, but the water sales is 400 million and we don't need water. And so there is no reason why Parker Water would want to even go that route if you get the water even out of the valley. So that usually solves the discussion because again, we don't need to go buy water, especially $400 million worth. But it's a lot of politics. I think you'll be reading more about it. Word on the street is there might be a recall coming at the end of the year. And so we'll see. But I figured they've made it clear that they don't want me there if they take over, so they can only fire me once. So I'm just telling everyone what I think. So I'm sure this will get back to me.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what that's like for you, but I think you.
Yeah, it's a little stressful.
Yeah. Alrighty. So lots going on. We've got a crew that is really involved in policy up here. So I want to slide into that. This one's for Dylan first. Other people can, of course, contribute. So I wanted to ask you about Senate Bill 213. This was a big land use package from this legislative session. It ultimately failed. Can you, Dylan, just elaborate on what that bill did to link housing and water availability? And what would you do differently to give it a better chance of success?
So this was one of the biggest bills of the last legislative session, Senate Bill 213, over 100 pages when it was first introduced. It was a bill strongly supported by the governor's office and others in the legislature to address what is the #1 crisis facing Colorado, which is housing affordability. It went about this by essentially allowing development by right on parcels of land. So if you owned a single-family zoned plot, you would be able to build a duplex or a quadplex or sixplex even. It had mandates and incentives for transit-oriented development, particularly on the Front Range, more density. It would allow you to build an accessory dwelling unit by right. And a variety of other things. I think there were parts of that bill that I really liked, and there were parts of the bill that I had significant concerns with. One of them is it didn't address water enough on the front end. I had municipal water providers in my district. I'm recalling the Eagle River Water and Sanitation District in Eagle County came down to the Capitol to testify and said, where are we going to get the water to support all these new homes that this bill would allow you to build? And that, I think that was true not just in the mountains, but all over the state. I think it also would have created more housing stock, but not necessarily more affordable housing stock, because particularly in the mountains, if you were able to build an ADU on every unit or turn every single family into a quadplex, you're just gonna be building a whole lot more Airbnbs. You're not gonna be building more units for workers. So there were amendments that got done in the bill as it worked its way through the process to address some of those, but I think it needs to, if that bill comes back or comes back in several different bills, it needs to address all the things we talked about just right today. How are you ensuring that those homes have adequate water supply? How are you incentivizing density over just development in general? Things like that. So I think that would be more successful, or that would make the bill more successful when it comes to water if we address it up front. And we got those amendments in the bill as it worked its way through the process. It didn't pass for other reasons, I think, not the water issue, but for all the reasons we talked about today, if we're gonna have a policy like that that incentivizes a lot more development, what are we doing to safeguard our water future at the same time?
Yeah, I'll weigh in just a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered this too earlier as well, to the senator's point. Even if we have a bill like that that does open up, kind of allows the markets to work a little bit more and allows property owners to say, well, maybe I don't want a single family detached, I want a duplex, or I do want to add an ADU. We're still going to have to go through that water process, right? To your point that you made earlier, you're still going to have to make sure there's adequate water supply. You're going to have a utility that says, yeah, we can provide water to this unit for that to happen. So I do think it was good what you were doing to make sure that we're thinking about that, right, as we do build more. Just because you authorize something doesn't mean you're going to get more of it. Developers don't fit square pegs into round holes. You can't. Nobody can, regardless of what the endeavor is. So I think it's important to have those conversations because you do need more use by right. I think it does lead to, and it's not an endorsement of that bill. I think but similar concepts to this bill. And I'll give the governor credit. He forced a well-needed conversation in this state that needed to happen. That local control versus state issue. But anyway, we won't go down to that because it's a water. But that happens in water too, doesn't it,
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes,
Yeah, local control versus state. But now I'm going too far afield here. But I just wanted to add that to what the senator was saying. Don't disagree with him. It was an important conversation. I do think it comes back probably as several different bills. But it's important for us to get to a place. We also think construction litigation reform needs to happen at the state level as well. But we think that provides more density or more ability for that for sale multifamily product to come into play. And we've already talked about the values of building more density as it uses less resources, right? Think 100 houses in one complex that's just landscaped once versus 100 different single family detached homes that are all landscaped on their own, right? And you start to see the savings you can enjoy when you start building at that density. So yeah, important conversation was started last year. I think you did a very good job, Senator, in making sure that the bill paid attention to the places it needed to. Ultimately, it didn't fail, and it wasn't for the water. It wasn't because of water, as the senator said. Yeah.
Alrighty, we are close to the end, but I have one more question for these folks, and then we'll try and fit in some audience questions. We'll see how many we get to. If you don't get to ask your question, feel free to send it to me because that informs my reporting. So I love hearing from everybody in the room. Okay, so we have talked about a lot of things. I know, Jennifer, I want to direct this one to you. You've done this great 95-page report that really delves into these things. And one of the things, one of the facets of that I thought was interesting was a suggested more regional approach. So I was wondering if you could elaborate. And when we're thinking about policy solutions, how does that, what were you discussing there? How does that fit in? And for everyone else, we'll go down the line. We'll expand what's one policy solution you wish we discussed more often.
And everyone on this panel can give examples of what I'm going to talk about, and that is that we need to start regionalizing. I talked about silos, and everybody's in their silos. We need to open that up. We need to share infrastructure. We need to share resources. We need to share our water, and that can be a challenge under our water law, but it can be done, and maybe we do need some tweaks to it. I look at it, and that's what we need to do. We need to come together. You look at a project, it's called the WISE project, between Denver and Aurora and South Metro entities. And they share their water supplies. You had the Douglas County folks drawing that water out of the ground that's not going to get replaced, and they saw that it was depleting. And so they hooked up this deal with Denver and with Aurora, and now they share those supplies. Sometimes it goes to the South Metro area, sometimes it goes to Denver, sometimes it goes to Aurora. We need more of those. The Parker partnership we talked about, another great example is the Chatfield Reservoir. I know it was a hassle while it was under construction, but what we did with Chatfield, and this was a partnership with the Corps of Engineers, the state, and the local entities along the South Platte River, we were able to restructure Chatfield so that we could store more water. So besides the regionalization that I preach, I also think we need more strategic storage to help us manage that water.
Okay. Yeah, water, housing, growth, policy solutions. Go, Ron. What's one you wish we talked more about? It's hard to pick. There are a lot of ideas.
It is. I would say, we, especially in the Douglas County area, and I think it was explained earlier, you have a lot of different silos coming up, and it's connecting and sharing is probably, and I won't repeat too much, but that is absolutely key. And I was part of the WISE deal, and it was painful to get all these people to agree. It took us years. I used to tell staff, we get paid to do the hard thing, so it's do the hard thing. But I think we've seen a lot of that, but it'd be nice that we could get more of that cooperation. One thing in Colorado that I've noticed when I moved here was people like to kill other people's jobs. And so it'd be nice that or their projects, it'd be nice that if we could have a culture that allows more of the sharing.
One thing that we didn't talk about it a lot today, and in general, a lot of things we've been talking about up here today are expensive, and we don't talk about the money enough. But that is a reason why I'm hopeful on this issue, both on housing and water, is there is a historic amount of funding available right now coming from the federal government because of the bipartisan infrastructure law that Congress passed and because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Our senators, as well as our U.S. senators and members of Congress, as well as others from the West, secured $4 billion for drought resiliency in the West. That is a massive amount of money that's now available. But we need, as a state, to be as forward-thinking, I think, and as aggressive as possible to seize that money and seize that opportunity to do a lot of the things that we have been talking about today. On the housing front, We did that with our American Rescue Plan dollars. We set over $500 million of what came to Colorado aside for affordable housing grants and loans to build more housing in Colorado. We need to do the same with our water. So what are we doing at the legislature? What are we doing at the municipal level to attract federal investment from those dollars? Because it's a historic opportunity, but it's not going to last forever, and we need to go out there and get our fair share.
I would agree with Jennifer. Well, everything's said. I'll just really quickly reiterate, Jennifer, the strategic water storage projects are absolutely necessary for reasons we've already talked about. But I would hope that we have more projects, more pilot programs on rainwater harvesting that hopefully demonstrate that you don't injure senior water rights, so that we can produce more housing like Sterling Ranch is doing, that uses 50% or sometimes more, or sorry, less, cuts water use by 50% or more, is what I was trying to say, than other traditional neighborhoods and communities in the Denver metro region.
It is 4 o'clock. I want to respect the other events happening today, but I'm down to stay for 5 more minutes if you all have questions. Does anyone have an urgent, interesting, insightful question that you would like to help us respond to? Okay, we've got Lauren who's going to help us with this.
I'm actually going to leave one mic here and one mic
Oh, thank you,
here.
Lauren. Okay.
Take it, yeah.
And Lauren, I guess we can go to this gentleman in the front first. I saw his hand first, right here. To the left, to the left. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You. It's on, check, check.
It's good.
Water storage. I know California has problems building new reservoirs. I saw a show that was kind of actually similar to this discussion today, that if they did 2 projects, built one reservoir and raised Shasta Dam 18 feet, California would have all the water they would need for any reason, yards or whatever. Are there structural impediments to building reservoirs in Colorado like there are in California? And then what about progressive water rates? To me, that seems like a real easy solution is just charge more when you use more. For every extra 10,000 gallons or whatever, you can just charge more. So thank you.
What happened with the long-term drought aridification is, with respect to your second question, people used less water and yet their rates went up. And that was because you still had the infrastructure that had to be dealt with. You still had to deliver that water. So that's a piece of it. Yes, there are some impediments to building storage. We have environmental compliance. You have to get permits from the local entities, from state, and from federal government. It's a challenge, but it can be done. And it's being done right now by Denver Water in what they're expanding their gross reservoir. It's being done by Northern Water in their looking at Windy Gap firming project, as well as the proposed NIST project.
Just one thing I'd add is the one thing we have going for us that California doesn't is we don't have a CEQA. We don't have a state EPA that allows one person in their state to go out and stop basically a project by filing suit. So we have the NEPA process that Jennifer just talked about, and we have to do our due diligence on that, but we don't have near the obstacles that California does to provide
And
more storage.
what we're seeing is we're planning on 10 years to get our reservoir permitted, and there's really no environmental issues. So it's doable, but it's just, you gotta have a lot of resolve to get there. As far as the progressive rates, we have them in there, and life-sustaining water for indoor use is like $250 a thousand. That's not too bad. Then if you get to the penalty, it could be $20 a thousand. But we live in a very wealthy area of Colorado, Front Range, but even Douglas County, and we have people with $6,000 a month water bills, and they don't blink. And so it does capture some people, but some people don't even pay their bills. Somebody in New York is writing checks to us. So.
Okay, we'll do 2 or 3 more, maybe 2. Yeah.
How can we trust municipalities not to approve housing developments that don't have sustainable water? We have such a long tradition in this state of municipalities approving developments with groundwater that will be depleted. I think Castle Rock and Parker are pretty good cases of that. So how can we trust our municipalities? That's
if you've
for
got a
sure.
good take on that.
Yeah, this went 5 minutes too long. So there are some municipalities that have the water districts built in. Our cities don't, and so we're a district that serves them. So I can tell you they are working with us. I don't know how, I can't answer the trust side of it, but they are talking to us now, and it's getting better. You know, in our district, Lone Tree's very green golf course look. It's very beautiful. You cross the freeway and you go into Parker, it's a lot drier, and then Castle Pines is very negative. So they're all very different, and they're all their own governments, and they get to look like what they want to look like. But it is because we're having these conversations and drought is on people's mind, they're coming to us saying, hey, people want the customers demanding less water use. And I tell you, nothing makes a customer or a resident mad when they try to get to work and they're driving down one of the main roads and it's sheet flowing water and they gotta go wash their car because they're going through that. And they get mad at us because, you know, they pay so much, but it's being wasted. So the narrative's changing, the people are demanding more. We're told no one would want a Colorado scrape, and that's not true. People are asking for that in their new homes. But as far as trust, I don't know. I don't have to answer that one. But I can tell you they're engaging us.
We'll do this gentleman. Did you still have a question? Yeah. Okay, and then we'll do. Okay, one over here, and then we'll call it.
Okay, just representing the environmental side of this, which is kind of out of our bailiwick here. You can see where I stand. It's reforestation. Colorado, through wildfires, is losing forests much faster than it can grow them back. Now, the thing about forests is on this planet, they are the most effective way of storing water. The safest place to store water is in the ground. And for millennia, that's what forests have done. They put it in the ground. And if we don't do something to save our Colorado forests, we're just throwing fuel on the fire, so to speak. So my personal project is to help accelerate the reforestation of the burn areas we have, because if we keep getting hotter, forest will not regrow there, it'll turn into a grassland.
Do we have a question?
And so I don't have a question.
Questions only, everybody. Let's go over here to the lady in the black. Thank you.
I would also add, while we're walking, that the reason we have national forest, one of the main reasons was to protect our water supply.
All right, let's do it.
Great, thank you. I have heard you speak a little bit, each of the panelists, about the impact of agricultural operations on water scarcity and agriculture operators selling their water rights so that we, as humans, can maybe have the water that we need in particular areas. But I wondered if the panelists might address oil and gas operations and their impact on water scarcity. And I don't know if any of you saw the article written by the New York Times this week about 1.5 trillion gallons of water utilized by fracking. So just a question, do you have any commentary on oil and gas and their use?
Thank you for the question. You're not wrong. Oil and gas uses a lot of water to develop energy and develop their product, and they do it in Colorado, obviously, on the western slope, in parts of my district specifically. But so it should be part of the conversation when we're talking about water. At the legislature this past year, we've passed legislation to incentivize more reuse of that water within the oil and gas operation, so that it's not a loss or anything like that. So those are the types of efficiencies that we're building in. As far as climate change and phasing out the use of carbon-intensive energy. Colorado is one of the leaders nationwide. We have some of the highest or the most strict greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, and have put in place significant regulation on the oil and gas industry. And I think we're seeing less development in Colorado because of that. So you're right. It should be a part of the larger water conversation. And Colorado, I think, is a leader in trying to save as much water in that sector as possible.
Okay, I think at this point, if you have other questions, get in touch with us. And I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank our panelists. Good job, everybody.